Yo, Elk here. You are listening to The Revolution. I am here with my guest, Mike Z. Hello.
Hello.
So, for those of you out there who aren't part of the fighting game community, could you tell us a bit about yourself, Mike Z?
Sure. So I've been playing fighting games since pretty much the beginning of Street Fighter 2, and I've gone through all the different generations. There was Killer Instinct, Mortal Kombat, all the major ones. Even played a decent amount of Tekken Tag, and then recently we started. Well, I guess recently for game development, which is 2.5 years. We started earnestly working on Skullgirls, which is our fighting game that we just released, and that came out at the beginning of, the beginning of April. So my dates are awesome, and now here I am.
Awesome. So, like you said, Skullgirls is out, and you are the project lead. So, for everyone out there who's new to Skullgirls, what was your position? What did you do?
I basically did almost everything. So before we got uh, signed, I was already working on the engine, which is the code that actually makes things go.
Mm-hmm.
And Alex, my partner, was working on the world and the art and the characters. And so I put together uh, the engine from scratch, and I scripted all the characters, and I helped design most of the moves and made everything work in the game, and then balanced everything at the end. So I guess the way I usually describe my job is I'm the kid with the Legos. So I didn't
Mm-hmm.
build the Legos, but there wouldn't be a house otherwise.
Okay.
Designers did everything you can't see, pretty much.
So, Xbox 360, PlayStation
Hmm.
3, it is out. It has been out since, like you said, early April. But there is a PC port in development. And
Yes.
mhm,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if there is any news on that front.
Well, the news is I sit behind the guy who's working on it, who was previously our multiplayer programmer. So we have a very, very small team because we're a downloadable title, and everybody has to wear many hats. So I can tell you that people are actually working on it, but as for when it'll be complete, it's kind of up to man hours versus one guy.
I'm really hyped for that because I heard about the cross-platform play. I have it on 360. Everyone else on staff has it on PS3, so I haven't been able to play against them.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
So,
actually one of the really nice things about Steam is that it lets you do that fairly seamlessly with a minimum of effort. It's kind of unfortunate that the console manufacturers won't get together and just allow people to do cross-platform with both consoles with the same software, but
mhm.
they kind of don't want to acknowledge each other's existence, which I guess makes some sense. So
Gotta
it was
buy
a
it for
choice.
both systems then. Everybody makes more
Yeah.
money.
Well, if I mean, not that's not really how it works, though. I mean, I guess that's how it works in marketing people's heads. But oh, well, if it comes out for both consoles, then people won't buy our console specifically for this game. But
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know. I don't see a lot of people making that choice. It's more like, well, I already have this console, so I guess I'll get the game for this one.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it was a choice between Steam or Games for Windows Live, and Steam wins by quite a margin.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, despite the fact that Games for Windows Live isn't, horribly adopted by anybody yet, it's also slightly clunkier, and it requires you to have a gold Xbox Live account even if you want to play online on PC and all the rest of that. So it's not really.
Yeah. I've had to deal with that with Street Fighter 4 on PC. Not fun.
No, I mean, it's neat, but they could have, finessed it a little.
Mhm. So, Skullgirls, obviously the reaction from the fighting game community has been overwhelmingly positive. I was wondering if you've had from just people coming and telling you about it, what the reaction has been from people outside of the community. Because I know the Skullgirls tutorial has been really revolutionary in that it actually teaches people how to play fighting games. And has that been enough to bring newer players who might not have been playing fighting games before up to speed?
Um, it seemed to do the job pretty well. Like when we brought it to PAX last year, we had a bunch of people come over that say, uh, we never play fighting games. We don't really find them all that interesting, but this game looks really amazing, so we're totally going to buy it and try and figure out what it's all about. Uh, I've had feedback from several people's mothers on the tutorial mode, which is interesting.
Hmm.
Like they said, "Oh, well, I left the room and I came back and my mom was playing the tutorials." So, uh, we've had feedback like it's confusing to make people switch characters in between the lessons, which is something that like most gamers wouldn't object to, but people that aren't even really gamers, they notice that kind of thing. So we're attempting to do something to like highlight which one is you at the beginning of each lesson. We've had oh good, there's a motorcycle and he's parking here. We've had a decent amount of feedback from people that say, for the first time, I kind of actually understand what fighting games are really about. Like, I never, before it was all about, well, I have these moves and I hit buttons, and like, if you look at the tutorials for games up until Skullgirls, the way that they present the information, I mean, even ignoring the fact that they don't try to teach you spacing or punishing or any of that stuff, the way that they present the information is, here's movement, here is attacking, like basic attacks, here's blocking, and then here's throws, here's specials, here's supers, here's combos, and they never go back to blocking or defense or movement ever again. So kind of implicitly they, downplay the importance of that as opposed to attacking, which is they focus the whole rest of the tutorial on. So when people go and play online, yes, they know how to attack because they were paying attention, but they don't know why and they don't know when, which is well over half of how you play fighting games.
Oh yeah, I mean, myself, I've been playing fighting games since Street Fighter 2 as well. And I've never been competitive and I've never really tried to get to that level. So even myself playing the tutorial specifically on the high-low mix-up was really, it taught me a lot that I should have probably figured out on my own after decades of playing fighting games, but I just hadn't. And it like, oh, block low all the time unless they're doing an overhead or in the air. That makes so much more sense than blocking standing when they're doing normals on you, grounded, because they might crouch really quickly. I never thought about that before.
Yeah, that was the nice thing about working on these tutorials was the fact, I mean, I've been playing fighting games since, the mid-90s, which is a lot longer than I like to think about. But, like, I tried to take the stuff that I'm always teaching people when they ask to learn how to play fighting games. I mean, I missed one, which is if your attacks all have a range of about a character width in front of you, don't be hitting attack buttons when the other person is across the screen because there's no reason to. But
Yeah.
I tried to take this stuff that was like, this is the part of games that people just don't seem to figure out. I mean, the longer you play, the more likely you are to figure it out. But the stuff that I always ended up telling people when they asked me to teach them how to play is the stuff that's in the tutorial. Like learning the distance on your special moves, learning how to escape kick throws, learning when to block high, learning how to mix another person up. That stuff is not all that advanced, but a lot of people don't come up with it unless they're introduced to the concept. Like you see people, or I guess it's online so you do see it, but you see people talking about do mix-ups, have footsies, like punish unsafe moves and stuff like that all the time. But unless that stuff is explained to you, it's kind of hard to figure out on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Those are like, as opposed to, these are the systems of the game, right? This is how you super in this game, this is how you throw in this game. Those are basics that apply to all fighting games, right? You always want to be trying to defend yourself properly. You always want to be punishing things that are unsafe. You always want to be looking for openings and trying to do things the opponent didn't expect. So as far as tutorials go, usually fighting games just teach you the specifics of the game that you're playing as different from another fighting game, as opposed to the specifics of fighting games in general as different from RPGs or, chess or what have you. So we tried very hard to make a tutorial that actually taught you fighting games from the beginning. Obviously, we skipped some stuff because, again, small team and time constraints. But I think we did a decent job. We've had a lot of people come back and say things like, normally when I play tutorials, I go through them, I do everything once, and then it's done. And it took me, 20 minutes to finally pass that mix-ups tutorial. That was really hard. What that says to me is that we actually taught them a lesson, as opposed to just having them learn something by rote.
Mm-hmm. I've seen people online doing the tutorial mode, like on YouTube, complaining about the fact that they were doing the high-low mix-up against the computer, and they did it once right, and then they failed the second time, and it went back to zero, and they're like, "Why did it go back to zero? I mean, I already did it once," and I couldn't understand why they didn't understand that the fact that you have to do it 3 times in a row means you're trying to get it ingrained into them that they'll be able to do it more than once when they have to, which I think is
Yeah,
super important.
there's a big difference between telling someone to do something and having them repeat it, and actually having someone learn. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Learning requires failure. Learning means that you can pull it out when you need to, as opposed to, this square is green, and I remember that from now on.
Speaking of teaching other people, there are some videos on YouTube with you working with the voice actresses of Skullgirls, trying to get them to learn their characters with moderate success. So how was that?
That was actually really interesting, because they had one of those before I was involved, and they've had another one since afterwards. But for a long time, I mean, like, I had actually taught Christina V, the voice director slash the person who played Sarabella.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd given her a couple of lessons over the course of us creating the game and, like, how to play fighting games. She actually has the ability to be pretty good. Like, she has really good reflexes, and she adapts very quickly, which you don't see in a lot of players. But I had offered to teach the rest of the cast, and then they kind of, got together otherwise, and I was out of town, and they were like, well, you should totally come to this one. So I came, and it was pretty much just a BS session, but it was really nice. They're way more fun than I would have initially guessed. Um, you work with people, and you think you get a sense of how they are, but then you don't really get to see them, like, off the clock very often. And they're a really interesting group.
Then
I'm
you
probably
pronounce
the
the
least interesting
accents.
member. Yes. Well, and then, we are however we are. And some are good, some are bad, I don't know. But we tried, and sometimes, we did a little bit.
So when it comes to Skullgirls, you've always said that you made the game you wanted to play, and with the systems like custom assists, IPS, restands, these are very uniquely Skullgirls. And I'm wondering, were these in your engine idea for a long time? Like you said, you've been working on it for 10 years. Or were they recently added during Skullgirls development?
Um, some of them were, like, the idea for the infinite prevention system was something I'd had for a while, but I hadn't tried to implement it until we actually got started working on the current version of Skullgirls. Restands are something that I've had for a while, but I mean, they lead to a lot of infinites, which is why games don't usually include them. Like, the nice part about having the infinite prevention system is if you can prove that there aren't any, I mean, unless we missed a move or whatever, if you can prove that there aren't infinites in your game, then you don't have to worry about designing characters around not having them. You can design characters that have them and then deal with them uh, with the system rather than changing move properties or whatever. Like, normally the reason that there aren't restands in other things is because they lead to really easy launch, small air combo, restand, launch, small air combo, restand, infinites. But since
Mm-hmm.
we don't have to worry about that, that wasn't a feature that we had to take out, right? If you look at, like, the Marvel series, uh, when your character gets hit and hasn't been knocked down and they touch the ground, they bounce and they recover right away. This is to prevent exactly that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But since we didn't have to worry about that, we didn't have to approach it the same way. We got to look at it as, what's what's the stuff that players find cool when they discover in other games? What are the things that make interactions really interesting, and be able to put those in without worrying about most of the consequences?
Yeah, that had
Because
to take a
we,
lot off your shoulders in terms of just fine tuning everything to make sure that you wouldn't have that infinite.
yeah, it was really nice. I mean, there are still long combos and loops and stuff, but it was
Hmm.
really nice because as soon as I did that, it was, we don't have to tweak the move properties of this so that you can't hit with this other thing afterwards because it leads back into the first thing. We can just let that happen. So if a move looks like it would knock you up in the air, it gets to knock you up in the air as opposed to knock you straight down. If you look at some of the changes that they made over the Versus series, for example, uh, they changed the way that certain moves knock you around when you use them in the air because they led to infinites in earlier versions. So what you get in later games is like the character hits you with a kick that goes clearly upward, and then it knocks you straight down because when it knocked you upward, it let you do an infinite.
Hmm.
We didn't have to do any of that, which was nice because it opened up other avenues in development. Like we didn't have to spend a ton of time making sure that the moves uh, worked the way that they needed to prevent stuff like this, which also meant that we didn't have to change how any of them looked. And during the development of a character, we didn't at all have to think about, well, if I give them this move, then it allows them to follow up with this other thing. We just were able to say, all right, we can give them everything, and it won't matter.
Awesome. So, these systems, they are uniquely Skullgirls, but do you think that that might change? I mean, when Super Street Fighter 2 came out with the super meter and the super moves, that was fairly quickly adapted into other fighting games. Do you think some of these custom assists, infinite prevention system, restands, do you think that these might get borrowed into other fighting games in the future?
Restands are already in some things in like very specific instances, like Rao in Hokuto no Ken has an air move where he stabs you with his sword and then sticks it in the ground and it stands you up, and you can do standing combos from that. It also led to several infinites, which is why they don't usually include that in games. But I mean, Hokuto no Ken has a billion of those anyway. Um, I would hope that some of this stuff influences other fighting games. I mean, what I tried to do with Skullgirls whenever possible was make it the way that fighting games should have been for like the last 10 years, except for they didn't change at all. Like how the button config works, where the button config is available, um, having the hold down the start button to pause the game so that you don't get accidental pauses during tournaments. Like all the little things, even as opposed to the game systems, the tutorials, like all of that, we did because, at least as far as I look at it, that's how fighting games should have been. It's not, you sit down and you have this giant epiphany and like, the genre should totally change in this way. It's just like, no, you play 3 or 4 fighting games and then this is how they should all work.
Hmm.
Not necessarily with respect to the systems, but like with everything else. I would hope that the systems would influence other developers. I mean, we didn't patent or copyright any of them like developers are want to do usually. Um, we didn't copyright our button scheme. We didn't copyright our tutorial mode. None of that. There's a lot of that, and it's really annoying to deal with. But for me, I hope that other developers will take from us whatever they possibly can. There is a way to design a game system so that you can prove that there aren't any infinites, and you don't have to kind of guess at it and then remove them later on. There are ways to deal with combos that don't just limit them to 99 hits or 45% damage or whatever. There are ways to not frustrate the player by having 2 moves that would normally connect, not connect later on. Like, there are nicer ways to do things than a lot of fighting games do. And developers thus far have just kind of, well, this is the way it's always worked, so we're just going to keep doing it this way. I hope that they take stuff from us. I would be flattered.
Hmm. You mentioned tournaments and button config, and I hadn't watched the mix-up, so I was out of the loop. But I checked Shoryuken today, and I saw the list of potential changes that they're not 100% for the patch coming up,
Mm.
and I was blown away by the tournament mode changes. That is brilliant.
Oh, that's actually a thing that we had wanted to include at ship. We just didn't have time to actually do them all, so we didn't get to put it in. But yeah, it's another thing that like uh, I heard when games say, "Oh yeah, we're totally going to come out with a tournament mode." I always figure that's a mode that helps make tournaments run smoother, rather than a mode that lets you set up a tournament in the game and then run it. You know, like you set up a 32-man bracket and the game will decide who plays who when and make you play. But
Hmm.
the stuff that tournaments have always needed is like everybody should configure their buttons before they start. So why not make them do that? You know, everybody should not be going into options that you would normally change that have nothing to do with the game, like rounds and timer. I mean, we played a couple of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 tournaments, got several rounds into the brackets before people realized it was on infinite time, which makes a difference. So, you know, and then you have to quit the game and you have to go through the main menu and change all the options and everything. So tournament mode just deals with that for you. Everything is default. It keeps track of wins on both sides. And the biggest one for me is when everybody's done with their match, generally they unplug the sticks that they're using and they leave, and then two new people come up, or pads, I guess. Two people new come up and plug in their new controllers, and then they have to make sure that they're on the correct side, and if they're on the 360, then they can't change what side they're on. And they have to go to rematch, and then they have to see whether their buttons are configured properly and configure them again. And it's like, you know, you could cut out a lot of that if, for example, what we did, which is in tournament mode at the end of the match menu, if you unplug a controller, it goes back to the controller select screen, from which you choose which side you're on, and then it forces you to go through button config, which is like everything that everybody does all the time.
Hmm.
So it's comes from having been in a ton of tournaments and watching the things that take the most amount of time. I mean, they just recently had a Marvel 3 tournament where I saw the players go through character select in match, main, like quit to main menu, change something in the options, go to character select again, go to the match, realize something else is wrong, go back to the main menu, change something else in the options, go back to the character select, and then finally go into the match, configure their buttons, then go back to character select, pick their real teams, and then go. And like, there's no reason for people to have to do that. Tournaments are, aside from, you know, people playing at their house, tournaments are what fighting games are for.
Definitely.
So there is no reason for you not to do, you know, 5 or 6 things to make them run slightly smoother.
And even
I'm
before
hoping it
tournament
works.
mode, I mean, Skullgirls had button config right at the menu, and people weren't using it in tournaments. I was watching tournaments, and people would go into the match, push the buttons, see if it was working, leave the match, and it's already there. I guess this just makes it easier because it automatically does it for you.
Yeah, that's actually one of the other reasons that I added this, is because Skullgirls does a lot to make tournaments run smoother anyway, like, you know, having to hold start to pause and allowing you to have button config on the character select and all that stuff. But uh, people weren't using it because they weren't used to the fact that it was there from other games not having it, right? Like you said, going into the match and checking that all their buttons work and then configuring it in the match is like other games don't have button config where they should, so players weren't used to it being there. The point of tournament mode is it presents you with all of the things that you need to do in order so that you can't forget anything, and it's all done by the time you get to the match. It also does nice things like unlock all the colors, uh, not all the DLC paid colors, obviously, but the colors that you can earn in-game are all unlocked only when you're playing in tournament mode, even if you haven't unlocked them otherwise, because people like to use their favorite colors, and if you're playing in a tournament, generally your console doesn't have a save that has all the colors, especially if it's like, oh, we need 100 consoles, and then, you know, install the game on all of them and then run the tournament like Evo does. So we did everything to try to make it streamlined for people. I even thought about removing pausing, but that's probably actually worse than it is better.
Yeah, I could understand there are some like I was wondering that as well. Like, why don't they just remove pause? But thinking about it, sometimes you do need to pause, so that does make sense to keep it in.
Well, yeah, it's mostly for tournament flow. Like, if you accidentally go into a match, I mean, yes, that takes a lot of button presses that people didn't mean to pick, but, you know, people do it every once in a while. So if you accidentally went into a match, you'd either have to restart the console or you'd have to kill the other person off, both of which take a decent amount of time.
Hmm.
So allowing pausing is something that we couldn't take out. We did look at locking out the home button, which was, we actually had this in most of the development versions before we shipped. So there's an exploit on PS3 where you can do something that disables the home button specifically. So you push it and you get the little, like, do not enter sign in the corner of the screen as opposed to the menu coming up, which is another cause of delays and disqualifications in tournament. So we tried to put that into the ship game, and Konami and Sony were like, no, this goes against lots of the things that it says you're not supposed to do in the console documentation, so don't do it. We're actually asking again, since we have a mode specifically for tournaments where people know that things will be different, whether they will allow us to do it there too. I'm hoping for it. It's probably not going to actually happen, but we tried.
I have seen like a lot of tournament matches where someone completely besides the fighters hits the home button like on a wireless controller and it will freeze up that console and it ruins that match. And it happens at the worst times, whether it's intentional from a troll or it's, well intentioned and they didn't mean to do that. It Having that would be really cool. So I really hope you guys get that.
That's the other nice part about forcing people to go back to the controller selection screen is since it lists the controllers that are connected, you can see if there are more than two.
I never thought of that.
I thought about, yeah, I thought about not having tournament mode uh, not allow you to start the match until there were only two controllers plugged in, but there are actually circumstances in which you would want to do that with a third controller plugged in as long as you know nobody's touching it. So that's also out. But at least this way you can tell, right? If the person leaves and forgets to desync their wireless controller, although I think at most tournaments now wireless controllers are banned for this reason. Like I know Evo doesn't let you use them because people forget to desync them and it causes problems. So the easier answer is don't let people use those and then you won't have that problem.
Okay, well, here's more of a development question.
Hmm.
The artistic side of the game, obviously, that's Alex's job. Your side was the gameplay, the fight styles. So when it came to designing the moves, obviously frame data is essential as well as direction of the blow. Like you mentioned earlier, a lot of games have the direction of the blow having no correspondence to the movement that it sends the characters, but that's not the case in Skullgirls, like whether it launches, knockdown, wall bounce, etc., and the amount of force. So how was the creative process of visual style and the substance of the move married?
Um, the creative process for us was actually, I'm led to believe, pretty unique. So basically the way that it worked was once the character was designed as like, it's Cerebella, she has a hat on her head that has arms in it, whatever. The artists go and create concepts. Like they have paint chats for a couple of weeks where they just get together and draw whatever. The character might do this, they might do this, they might go grocery shopping, whatever it is. And they come back with, 350 different drawings of the character doing things that may have some stuff to do with fighting. And from there, I look at those, and since those are all fairly cohesive, right, you're not going to have, like, a football player throwing a fireball. I mean, you might actually because they throw footballs, but whatever. Like, so a lot of those moves are limited to what the character might really do, like that's in character for them because the artists aren't going to draw something that's totally off the wall or that's like unrelated. So they give me all of that brainstorm, and then I go through and look at it and like, oh, this would probably work for medium punch. This would work for weak punch. Usually they don't draw weak punches because those are really uninteresting compared to giant moves where they smack you across the screen. So I have to go back and ask for like, we need a crouching weak kick, guys. Come on, you can't skip that stuff. But so I lay out a group of moves. These are all the moves that the characters have, and make sure that they all reach different areas and have different utility and all that stuff. And if we didn't get something like if their medium punch should be an anti-air, then I'll go back and say, well, we need a medium punch that hits like right around here. instead, and then they'll do a short session and come up with several of those. And we put that together in a doc, and then they go and they make roughs of each move. So you'll get or I'll get a frame of startup, a fully extended frame, and a frame that's during the recovery. And we'll go and put those in the game as is. So you'll see, the frame of startup repeated for 6 frames, and then the extension for 4 frames, and then the recovery for 12 for a weak punch. And once the character is fully playable like that, we go and tell the animators what the timing is and give them the roughs, and then from there they can do whatever they want with the intervening frames as long as the timing remains the same. So the bits of the development process that are really gameplay focused are entirely gameplay focused, like where the moves go, the properties they have, the time that they take is entirely derived from gameplay. But past that, what they actually look like during that time comes completely from the animators, which is really nice because it lets us get, everybody works better with constraints. When you say to somebody, you can do whatever you want, usually they futz around and they have a hard time figuring out what it is. But when you come to somebody and say, you can do whatever you want and it's got to take less than 4 hours for you to make it, then they'll work better, especially if they're doing something more creative that's not a task that might take longer than 4 hours. So each of us has constraints, right? The gameplay is constrained by what moves you got and what the character has to be doing, and then the animation is constrained by the gameplay. So you get good results from both teams, but they don't interfere with each other, I guess. And it doesn't require a huge amount of iteration on anything.
Okay, that's actually awesome. I thought it was going to be different. I didn't know what to expect from that question,
Hmm.
but that's awesome. That is really
I'm
cool.
sorry if that wasn't the response you expected.
No, no, I mean I thought it would be well, uh, from the gameplay side, we were looking for something with this amount of frames. So I shot that over to the graphics side, and they came up with that, and then they sent it back, and then they, a back and forth sort of thing. I didn't think it would be something cool and creative, like the paint process with 3 different ideas, and then each of those ideas were fit into the character somehow. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, that extends to absolutely everything too. Um, for example, Sarabella probably was going to end up a grappler because she has giant arms, but since we got most of the concepts back that were her grabbing people by the head and slamming them into things, she actually ended up a grappler. Peacock, we didn't really know what she would end up, but since they drew a lot of dropping anvils from the sky and throwing bombs at people and all that stuff, she ended up a zoning character. So it's even down to what the playstyle of the character will eventually be is mostly determined by what type of things they would actually do as a character, rather than this guy is going to be a zoning character, so he needs projectiles and a gun or whatever else. It's very organic, and most of it comes out of what the character is and what they would really do, as opposed to what we're trying to make them do. There are some cases where it's well, if they're a zoner, then they have to have a move that hits or that throws a projectile. But for the most part, it's a lot of the basics of the character are actually determined by the art rather than the gameplay.
That I was gonna ask about grappler zoning, rushdown, and you've just answered that question. That is, again, I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting something more along the lines of getting unique fight styles and then looking at the characters and sort of matching it to it, instead of taking the characters, bringing them through the motions, and then attaching the fight style to the character instead of
Yeah,
vice versa.
a good, well, you said vice versa. That's hilarious, because a good example I was just going to use is one of Sarabella's moves. Her hat's name is vice versa, so it's funny. But a good example I was going to use is her jumping weak punch, which is, for the first hit of it, she swings up onto the hat and hangs from it and kicks you on the way up. And then for the other hits of it, if you push the button more than once, she punches you from the hanging position. That only would have come about if the moves were designed from art first rather than from gameplay first. Because generally when you think of a jumping weak punch, if it's a rapid fire move, it's just they do something with one hand and they do it with the other hand, or they hold something out and whack you with it a couple times. But I mean, she was a grappler, so I would never have guessed to give her a rapid fire weak punch like that. But they came, they drew one of these pictures was her hanging from the hat and punching somebody in the head, and it was like, that looks really neat. Let's see if we can actually try to make that work as gameplay. A bunch of the stuff that we ended up keeping, a lot of Painwheel's moves for one, because she contorts herself into all sorts of different directions, came from specifically the artists drawing things that they really thought would be cool if the character did them. So why not make the character do that stuff?
That's so cool. I have one more question.
Hmm.
I know you've kind of been tight-lipped on this before, so if you can't say anything, uh, I won't be offended. But obviously, you guys are working on new characters to add to the game,
Hmm.
and I've heard talk about Leduc, Big Band, Squiggly, Umbrella, but the character I'm interested in the most for a potential DLC is Minette, and I'm wondering if you could give me sort of just a bottom of the list, middle of the list sort of idea of where Minette could potentially be on the list of potential DLC.
Um, I know that before we put the game out, I think she was actually last, but given the amount of enthusiasm, I guess would be putting it mildly, that fans have shown for her, uh, we are probably going to move her up from not last. Uh,
Awesome.
I mean, how's this? The order, aside from the character that we're actually working on already, is always pretty flexible, and a lot of it comes down to whether or not we think we can make the plot work if these characters exist before other characters exist. But if they're characters that didn't really fit into the plot before, like, I mean, Big Band's not in the plot very much, we are able to shuffle them around a decent amount based on who we think people are really excited about. So I can tell you that for sure she's not last, but I don't know where she is now.
So what you're telling
Awesome,
me
or was
is we
unfortunate,
need
I think.
more Minette fan art.
Yeah, let's roll 34, possibly.
Well, I think we've taken up a lot of your time, so I was wondering if you would take part in a 91.8 The Fan tradition.
Sure.
We try to get all of our guests to give us a radio bump live on air. Would you be willing to do that?
Sure, what do I say?
You say, my name is, insert name, I do this, insert what you do, what you're involved in, whatever you want to put there is fine, and you're tuned into 91.8 The Fan.
Do you want this as, like, radio personality? Like, my name is Mike Z, and you're
Whatever
listening
you
to
want to do.
91.8. Um, okay, sure. Boy, asking to do accents on command is always difficult. Well, I guess I can do a regular one. My name is Mike Z, and I'm the producer on... Oh, totally not the producer, yes. My name is Mike Z, and I'm the project lead on Skullgirls. You're listening to 91.8 The Fan.
Awesome.
And if I can think about doing one in a different accent, I'll call you later.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. It was a huge pleasure to have you on here. And just let us
It was
know
very nice
whenever
to
you
be on
can.
here. Sorry.
Oh, no, no. I'm so happy. I'm so happy that you're happy.
Well, I'm happy that you're happy. Thank you very much for having me. It's really nice to get calls like this to be on random talk shows because people like the game. I mean, that's amazing to me.
Oh,
So
yeah,
I'm
definitely.
extremely happy to have been here.
Skullgirls has been my go-to game since it came out. And for everyone who's listening, if you haven't gotten it yet, Xbox 360, PS3, and sometime soon, PC. I suggest getting it for all three of them if you have the consoles for them. I don't have a PS3, so I have it for 360. I'm definitely going to be getting it on the PC when it comes out, just so I can have that cross platform play eventually. And I think we should get you guys back to some music. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. It will be up shortly if you missed any of it. We got Olivia with Pass Me the Sugar.